Hello all. In this lecture, we will see about entity types, entity sets, then what you mean by this key attribute, and also value sets. So this is the outline. So first we will see entity. So we have already seen this entity in the previous lecture. We will once again go through this entity. Then entity type, entity set, what you mean by key attributes. Then will also see the value set and also initial conceptual design of that company database and also a summary of this ER notations, and also you'll see some examples also. So we'll see what is entity, entity types, and entity set. So we have to distinguish between these three things. First one is entity. We have already seen the previous thing. It is a thing or object in the real world with an independent existence. We have already seen a particular person, John Smith, or a particular car like Alto car, a particular house, or an employee, or a company, a job, or a university, or KTU university. So all these are known as entities. Okay, so these are all known as entities. So it is a particular thing. So it is a particular thing. You have to note that it is not a group of things. It is a particular thing. If you consider KTU University is an entity. Maruti Alto car is an entity. John Smith is an employee entity. Like that, all these will be considered as entities. It is a particular thing. Then entity types, or we call it a schema, or we have already heard this word intention. If you when you learn conceptual schema and all, I have mentioned this intention and extension word. So all this we call it as entity type. So it is a collection or set of entities that have the same attributes. So we can group these entities. So if we group all the faculties of the college, so all these faculties will form a particular group. We call it as faculty entity type. All the students of the college will form the student entity type. So they will have share the same attributes. They will have the same attributes. So if you take a particular student, he will have some attributes. If you take another student, he will have the same set of attributes. So entity type means it is a collection of entities. So entity, it is a particular thing. If you take John Smith is a particular employee. So if you take the collection of all employees, then it will form an entity type, or we call it a schema of the uh, or schema of that particular type. Then we call it as intention also. Okay. So example, a company employing hundreds of employees is an example for that entity type. So all these employee will be an entity type. Employee means an entity type. All the employees will be considered as entities. So each entity has its own values for each attribute. So each employee will have its own value for the attributes, and it is described by its name and its attributes. So when we represent this entity type, it is described using the name of that entity type and also the set of attributes. So if you take employee, employee is an entity type, and the attributes for that employee are name, social security number, sex, date of birth. Like that, there will be several attributes. Then we have entity set or entity collection, or we call it as extension also, extension. So we know that if it is populated table, it is known as entity set or extension. So all entities of a particular entity type in the database at any point in time is known as the entity set. That is actually the extension. If it's a table database is filled with all the data, then that table is known as entity type. If we take the student table, there will be several students. There may be 3,000 students that data will be there in that table. Then that is known as the entity set. The information in that thing is known as entity set. So it contains information of all the 3,000 students. So all entities of a particular entity type in the database at any point of time is known as entity set or entity collection, or we call it as extension also. So you have to distinguish between these three. So entity means it is a particular thing. So if we take John Smith, John Smith is an employee. It is a particular entity. So it is an employee entity. Entity type means if we take the whole all the employees together, then we call it as the employee entity type. Then entity set means if we take the information that is there in the entity type entity, or if we take the information of all the entities, if we take for example, if we take the student entity type, if we see the data inside that, we call it as the entity set. So this is actually the entity type. So employee is an entity type, company is another entity type. So it is described by the name and the attributes in it. So company is described by the name and the attributes. So this is known as the entity type. And if we fill that with information, if we have some data inside that table, so if we are filling with some employee details, John Smith, his age is 55, his salary is 80K. Like that, there is E2, another entity. Fred Brown with 40 age and 30,000 salary. Then we have several like this employees. Then this is known as the entity set. We have the data info in it. Then it is known as entity set or extension. So this is another example. Company. So we have different companies. C1 is an entity one. Then C2 is another one. So these are known as entity sets. So this is known as entity set. So if we have the data inside that, we call it as entity set, and this is known as entity type. So this E1 is an entity. So this John Smith is an entity. Fred Brown is an entity. Jude Clerk is an entity. All together is known as entity set. And the common name that is given to this thing is known as entity type. The next one is key attributes of an entity type. So, an attribute of an entity type for which each entity must have a unique value is called the key attribute of that entity type. For example, social security number of an employee. So, if you take an employee entity type, social security number is an example for that key attribute. Or if you take a student table, student entity type, in student entity type you have your admission number. So admission number is a unique value for each student. You will have a unique value for that admission number. Or if you take the Aadhaar number, it is also a key attribute. Or if you take the university register number, it is also a key attribute. So it is an attribute of an entity type for which each entity must have a unique value. Then it is known as key attribute. Okay. That key attribute may be composite. For example, vehicle tag number is a key of the car entity type. That is a vehicle identification, vehicle number. So if you take KL35C2345, then KL represents actually the state. Then the rest represents a number. So it is a composite attribute. It is a combination of state and number. So KL represents state and the rest is a number. So it is known as vehicle tag number, we can call it as. It is a key attribute of that car. It is a composite. Then an entity type may have more than one key. For example, car entity type may have two keys. One is vehicle identification number, VIN number, or the engine number, engine serial number. It is unique. Then the registration number of the car, we call it as vehicle tag number or registration number. That is also unique. So both these are considered as keys for that car entity type. So similarly for student. So if you take student also, you also have unique key attributes, different key attributes, more than one key. Your admission number is a key attribute. Then your Aadhaar number is a key attribute. If you are storing the university register number, that is also a key attribute. So you have three key attributes. So for the student entity type, you have three keys. So for a particular entity type, you can have several key attributes. So key attribute, it is an attribute or it can be a set of attributes also. It is an attribute or a set of attributes of an entity type for which each entity must have a unique value. Then it is known as key attribute. Okay. So this is an example for key attributes for the car thing. So for the car we have registration number and also vehicle ID. So this combination is a key attribute. So this combination is a key attribute. So Texas is state and this is a number. So this combination is a key attribute. Then there is a vehicle ID also, TK629. So this is a engine serial number or vehicle identification number, we can say. This is also a common. This is also a key attribute. Like that, if you take for car 1, these two are unique. Car 2, these two are unique. So you have to see that this combination is unique. If you see this, we have ABC123 here also, here also ABC123 here, but the state is different, Texas, and here it is New York. So if it is a composite attribute, then that combination forms a key attribute. So this combination forms the key attribute. So individual attributes may have same values. Okay. So car 1 and car 2, we have two key attributes. Like that, car 3, we have another attribute. And if you see, this color is a multi-valued attribute. That is why it is represented in braces. So this car is red and black. This car is blue alone. So this car is white and blue. Okay. So here key attributes. So this is a composite key attribute and this is a simple key attribute. The next topic is value sets or domain of attribute. So each attribute will take values from a specific set of values. So this value set specifies the set of values that may be assigned to that attribute for each individual attribute. So we cannot take all values. For example, for age of employees, it should be between 18 and 60. No a person who is above 60 years can work in a particular company, or below 18 cannot work in a company. So we will fix that value set or domain of this age as 18 and 60. So it is between 18 and 60. So all employees age will fall between 18 and 60. Like that, for students we can fix the age as 17 to 30. Above 30 age or above 40 you cannot enroll into a particular college. Like that, you can fix the age from 17 to 40. So value set or domain of attributes specifies a set of values that may be assigned to that attribute for each individual entity. So value set for the name attribute. So we can take another example as a value set for the name attribute. For the name attribute, we can specify that name should be characters alone. It should contain only alphabets. We cannot include digits in the name attribute. Like that, we can specify the value set or domains for each type of attribute. Okay. So we will see the initial conceptual design of the company database. Those who do not know what is this company database, you can refer lecture 9. So in that lecture 9, we have seen the company database example. So we are going to design that data requirements. So we have specified the data requirements of the database, the company database. Now we are going to do the initial conceptual database design. So this department, we will have an entity type named department whose attributes are name, number, locations, manager, and manager start date. So these are the elements that are to be stored or the attributes for this department. And locations is the only multi-valued attribute here. So the department can be located in several different locations. Then both name and number are separate key attributes. For a department, we have already mentioned that name of that department is unique and also number of that department also unique. So they are separate key attributes. Name is a key attribute and number is also a key attribute. Then we have another entity type, we call it as project, and the attributes of that project are name, number, location, and there will be a controlling department for a particular project. Then here name and number are separate key attributes. This you should distinguish between this thing. That is why I have included this separate word, because it is not that combination. Name of a project, it will be unique, and number of a project will also be unique. Then we have entity type employee, and these are the attributes of that employee: name, social security number, sex, address, salary, birth date, department, and there will be a supervisor for each employee. Then both name and address may be composite attributes. They can be stored as composite attributes or simple attribute. You can store name as a particular field, or you can split that name into three different fields. Similarly, address, you can store it as composite attributes or at a single attribute also. So, for example, name may be divided into first name, middle name, last name. It is not the case. Address can be stored as a single attribute also. You need not store it into a simple attributes or separate it into different fields also. It is not always necessary. Then we have another entity type, we call it as dependent, and attributes are employee. The dependent belongs to a particular employee, so that employee name or some number should be stored here. Then dependent name, the sex of that dependent, birth date, and also the relationship to that employee, whether he's spouse or children, like that, all those things should be stored. So these are the basic notations that we'll be using. So this rectangle represents an entity. Entity type is represented in an rectangle. Then attributes are represented in ovals with connected to this entities. Then key attributes will be underlined. So attributes will be represented in ovals, and if it is a key attribute, then we have to write that name and we have to underline it. Then multi-valued attributes will be double ovals, so it just will be represented like this. Then if it is a composite attribute, it will be represented like this. So if it is name, then we will write name inside this bubble, and first name, middle name, and last name will be written in three different bubbles. Then if it is a derived attribute, then it will be specified in dotted lines. So we have already seen age is a derived attribute which can be derived from date of birth. So it will be represented in dotted oval. So you will see an example, then you will understand. So this is an example for this car entity type. So we have already seen this example car. So this can be represented in entity relationship model like this. So car is the entity type. So it should be represented in rectangle. So the attributes of the car is, first one is registration. So registration is a key attribute. We have already seen. So that is why it is underlined. Registration is a key attribute. And this registration is a composite attribute. That we have state and number. So that is why it is connected like this, state and number. Then we have second key attribute, that is vehicle ID. That is why it is also represented as novel and underlined. Vehicle ID is written and it is underlined. So these two are the key attributes, and this is a composite attribute also. Then the other attributes are make. So make is there, then model is there, model is connected to here, then their year is there. Then we have color, which is a multi-valued attribute. So multi-valued attribute should be represented in double oval. So double oval should be used to represent this multi-valued attribute. So in this way we can represent the entities. So we have to identify the different entities and we have to represent the using ER models. So we have identified the different entities here. Department, project, employee, and dependent are the different entity types, and the attributes also. So we have to represent using this ER notation. So these are the ER notations that will be using. So you'll see the example. So this is a car. Now we will see the company example. For the company, for first entity type is department. So department, we have name, which is a key attribute. Then number, it is also a key attribute. Then department will have a manager. Then manager start date is another attribute, and locations is another attribute. This is multi-value. Then we have project entity type. Now this is project, and the attributes are name, which is key attribute, number, which is also a key attribute, then location, and there is a controlling department. Then the another entity is employee, and in employee, SSN is the key attribute, social security number, that is underlined. Then we have sex, salary. We have salary also. Then we have department, and we have birth date also, and address. Even though it is composite, we are representing it as a single attribute. It is not necessary that you to split this address. If you want, you can split it into street number, zip code, like that and all. It is always not necessary. But here name is also an attribute, and here name we have split into three different attributes, that is first name, then middle initial, and last name. So this is how to represent a composite attribute. And also we have a works on attribute is there. Works on attribute, because an employee will be working on different projects. We have already mentioned in the design that employee will be working on several different projects. So he'll be working on, that is why it is multi-valid attributes. So he'll be working on maybe three projects at a time. So for each project, there will be a project number, and also he'll be working on number of hours. For each project, he'll be working for a particular number of hours per week. So that is also to be stored. So that is why it is represented like this. So this is the initial conceptual design. We will be modifying this thing. Works on will be a relationship. We will be studying about relationship later. So we'll be converting it into. So these are the attributes of that employee. So this is how to represent that employee. Then we have a dependent entity type. So these are the attributes. One is employee, then there's a dependent name, then sex, then birth date, and also the relationship with the employee. So these are the attributes. So here we do not have a key attribute actually. There is no key attribute because nothing can be used to uniquely identify this particular dependent. So you will see how to identify that later. So we have already mentioned that we have to draw the CI diagram. So initially we have designed this employee. So we have drawn how, we have seen how to represent this employee entity type, and also we have seen how to represent this department employee, department entity type. And department, we have a derived attribute also. This number of employees can be easily derived from the department entity, because we have to simply count the number of employees in that particular department. We can easily get the attribute number of employees. So this is derived attribute should be represented in dotted ovals. We have another thing is project, and these are the attributes of the project, and this is dependent. Don't think about this double lining and all. We will be learning about this later. Then name, it is dotted line and all. We are not confused with this. This is not unique key attribute and all. We will see this later. Sex, birth date, relationship. So this is the initial design. So we'll learn all how to represent the whole diagram. So we have all, initially we have designed the different entities. So entities are employee, department, project. That's what we have seen here. This department, project, then employee and dependent. So this is a reference. Thank you.